The Kalari Empire had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. Their ships moved like ghosts through space. Their soldiers phased through matter at will, and their technology was beyond anything most species could comprehend. They were the untouchables, the unreachable ones who conquered worlds without ever truly being there. Commander Zara Velthani stood on the bridge of the flagship Ethereal Dawn, watching another human colony burn in the distance. Her crystalline blue skin shimmered as she phased partially out of phase with reality, a casual display of her people's greatest gift. To the Kalari, solid matter was merely a suggestion, something to be ignored when convenient. "The humans continue to resist," reported her lieutenant, his voice carrying the characteristic harmonic resonance of their species. "Their weapons pass right through our forces, but they refuse to surrender." Zara's 4 eyes focused on the tactical display. Humanity had spread across dozens of systems in the past century, but they remained primitively bound to their physical forms. No phase technology, no dimensional manipulation, just crude kinetic weapons and chemical explosives that might as well have been throwing stones at shadows. "They are persistent," she admitted, though there was something in her tone that her subordinates couldn't quite identify. In the 3 months since the Kalari had begun their expansion into human territory, she had expected quick capitulation. Instead, every human world fought to the last defender, using tactics that made no logical sense. On the surface of Kepler 442b below, the human resistance had barricaded themselves in an underground bunker complex. Zara had already sent her phase troopers down to end the conflict quickly, but something unexpected was happening. Her soldiers were reporting difficulties. She activated the communications array. "Phase Leader Corvex, report." The response came back filled with static and confusion. "Commander, we cannot penetrate their final stronghold. There is something wrong here." Zara's head tilted, a gesture that in human terms might have seemed curious, but for her people indicated deep concern. "Elaborate." "Their defenses are constructed with some kind of dense matter composite. We can phase through the outer walls, but the deeper we go, the more solid everything becomes. It's as if reality itself grows thicker around their command center." This was impossible. The laws of physics that governed phase shifting were absolute. The Kalari had mastered these principles before most species had invented agriculture. Yet humans, with their barely spacefaring technology, had somehow created barriers that could impede phase manipulation. "I will investigate personally," Zara decided, her voice carrying the authority that had conquered 17 star systems. As her personal phase pod descended through the atmosphere, Zara reflected on the strange nature of human resistance. Other species, when faced with the Kalari's phase technology, either surrendered immediately or died quickly. Humans did neither. They adapted, improvised, and somehow found ways to keep fighting even when victory was impossible. The human bunker complex was built into the side of a mountain, its entrance sealed with massive blast doors that her troops had simply walked through. But as Zara approached the deeper levels, she felt something she had never experienced before. Resistance. Not physical resistance, but something that pressed against her phased form like swimming through increasingly thick liquid. Her phase field began to fluctuate as she moved deeper into the facility. The walls around her seemed to pulse with an energy that shouldn't exist, something that made the very air feel solid and oppressive. Then she turned a corner and saw him. The human was sitting calmly at a control console, his hands moving across primitive input devices with practiced efficiency. He was tall by human standards, with dark hair and the kind of weathered features that spoke of a life spent in harsh environments. What struck her most was his complete lack of fear. Every other species fled in terror when they saw a Kalari phase through walls. This human simply looked up and nodded as if greeting a neighbor. "You must be the commander," he said in accented Standard Galactic. His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a roughness that suggested someone used to shouting orders over battlefield noise. "I'm Colonel Marcus Chen, commanding officer of the 3rd Colonial Defense Brigade." Zara attempted to phase through the control panel to reach him directly, but her form solidified with a sensation like hitting a wall. For the first time in her centuries of life, she was completely corporeal, unable to shift between dimensions. The feeling was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice losing its usual controlled modulation. "What have you done?" Marcus gestured to the walls around them, which now showed a visible network of conduits running through the metal and stone. "Graviton field generators. We noticed that your phase technology works by shifting your molecular structure into a parallel dimensional frequency. So we built a localized gravity distortion that locks matter into our dimensional space." The technology he described should have been impossible for humans to develop. They barely understood quantum mechanics, let alone transdimensional physics. Yet here she stood, as solid and vulnerable as any primitive being, unable to access the fundamental advantage that had made her people masters of the galaxy. "You're afraid," Marcus observed, and there was no mockery in his voice, only a strange kind of understanding. "I can see it in your eyes, all 4 of them." Zara wanted to deny it, but the sensation of being trapped in purely physical form was overwhelming. For her species, it would be like a human suddenly finding themselves unable to breathe air, forced to exist in a completely alien state of being. "This cannot last," she said, trying to reassure herself as much as him. "My forces will destroy this facility." "They'll try," Marcus agreed. "But you see, we've had 3 months to study your technology. Every time you phase through our defenses, we learn a little more. Every battle teaches us something new about how to fight an enemy that doesn't follow the normal rules of physics." As if summoned by his words, alarms began blaring throughout the bunker. Through the transparent aluminum viewing port, Zara could see her phase troopers materializing inside the facility's upper levels. But something was different about their movements. They flickered in and out of phase irregularly, as if struggling against some invisible force. "Humanity's greatest strength has always been adaptation," Marcus continued, his fingers still working at the console. "We don't have your technology, your longevity, or your natural abilities. What we have is the ability to look at an impossible problem and figure out how to solve it anyway." On the tactical display, Zara watched her elite forces stumbling through corridors like drunken recruits. The humans had somehow weaponized their gravity distortion technology, creating pockets of normal space that forced her soldiers into vulnerable corporeal form at random intervals. Where her troops expected to ghost through walls, they found solid barriers. Where they planned to phase through weapons fire, they discovered bullets and energy beams that could suddenly touch them. "You're changing the rules of engagement," she realized, the implications hitting her with the force of a stellar collision. "We're playing by our rules now," Marcus confirmed. "And our rules say that if you want to invade human space, you'd better be ready for a fight." As Zara stood there, trapped in solid form for the first time in her life, watching her supposedly invincible forces being outmaneuvered by primitive humans, she began to understand why 17 previous invasions had failed to break human resistance. It wasn't that humans were stronger or more technologically advanced. It was that they refused to accept that the game couldn't be won. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridors as human soldiers moved to secure the upper levels of their bunker. For the first time since the invasion began, it was the Kalari who were retreating. Marcus stood up from his console and moved closer, and Zara felt a strange sensation as he approached. The graviton field around them seemed to intensify, but rather than feeling more trapped, she experienced something unprecedented. Where the energy fields of the facility felt oppressive and alien, his presence felt warm, stable, like an anchor in a storm of dimensional chaos. "You're not what I expected," she found herself saying. The words coming out before her disciplined military mind could stop them. "Neither are you," Marcus replied, and when their eyes met, something sparked between them that had nothing to do with graviton fields or phase technology. The war was far from over, but in that moment, Commander Zara Velthani realized that humanity possessed a power that couldn't be measured in weapons or technology. It was the power to change everything, including the hearts and minds of their enemies. Outside, the battle raged on, but inside the bunker's command center, two beings from different worlds stood facing each other across a gulf that might just be bridgeable after all. The real question was whether the galaxy was ready for what would happen when an unstoppable force met an immovable object, and both discovered they could learn from each other. 3 days had passed since Zara's capture, though she wasn't entirely sure if that's what this was. The humans had provided her with quarters in their underground facility that were, by any reasonable standard, comfortable. They fed her, allowed her to maintain communications with her fleet, and treated her more like a visiting dignitary than a prisoner of war. It was all very civilized and completely baffling. She stood in the observation deck Marcus had shown her, watching human engineering teams work around the clock to expand their graviton field generators. The technology was crude by Kalari standards, held together with what looked like metallic tape, and powered by fusion reactors that produced almost as much noise as energy, yet it worked, and that was what mattered. "Your people are remarkably resourceful," she said as Marcus joined her at the viewing window. "We have to be," he replied, carrying 2 cups of what he called coffee, offering her one. She had tried the bitter liquid the day before and found it unexpectedly pleasant, though she would never admit it to her crew. When you can't phase through problems, you have to think your way around them. The past few days had been a revelation for Zara. Stripped of her natural abilities, forced to interact with the world in purely physical terms, she had begun to understand something about human perspective that no amount of military intelligence could have taught her. Humans lived every moment in direct contact with reality, unable to escape into parallel dimensions when things became uncomfortable. It made them incredibly focused and surprisingly resilient. "My fleet is growing restless," she informed him, though there was no threat in her voice. "They expect me to either conquer this world or withdraw to await reinforcements." Marcus nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed Kalari ships maintaining their positions in orbit. "What will you tell them?" It was a question she had been asking herself since their first conversation. Military doctrine was clear. If a world could not be taken quickly and efficiently, it should be subjected to orbital bombardment until resistance ceased. But something about that solution felt wrong now, in ways she couldn't quite articulate. "I've been thinking about what you said," she admitted, "about adaptation. Your species has been at war for most of its recorded history, but never with opponents like us. How do you prepare for an enemy that ignores physical laws?" "The same way we prepare for anything else," Marcus said, settling into a chair beside the observation window. "We study it, test it, and find its weaknesses. Everything has weaknesses, even dimensional phase technology." As if to illustrate his point, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Through the reinforced viewing port, they could see Kalari assault troops materializing inside the compound's defensive perimeter. But something was wrong with their coordination. Soldiers appeared at random intervals, some fully phased, others partially solid, creating a chaotic mix of visible and invisible attackers. "Phase disruption mines," Marcus explained casually, watching his security teams respond to the incursion. "We scatter them around the perimeter. They don't prevent your people from phasing, but they make it unpredictable. Hard to coordinate an attack when half your troops might solidify inside a wall." Zara watched her elite soldiers stumbling through what should have been a routine infiltration operation. Some rematerialized inside solid objects and had to phase out quickly to avoid injury. Others found themselves unable to phase at all, caught in localized gravity distortions that left them vulnerable to human weapons fire. "This is impossible," she breathed, though the evidence was right in front of her. Phase technology has been mastered for millennia. There are fundamental laws that govern dimensional manipulation. "Maybe," Marcus acknowledged, "but humans have a saying, rules are meant to be broken. We've spent the last 3 months learning your rules so we could figure out how to break them." The assault was failing spectacularly. Kalari troops that should have been untouchable were retreating in disarray, their technological superiority neutralized by human ingenuity and an apparent willingness to violate several laws of physics in the process. "You're winning," Zara realized, and there was something in her voice that might have been admiration. "We're surviving," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. Your people could glass this planet from orbit anytime they wanted. We're not winning this war, we're just making it too expensive for you to continue." That evening, Zara found herself in the facility's recreation area, watching human soldiers relax between shifts. They played games, told stories, and maintained the kind of camaraderie she had read about but never truly understood. Kalari military units were efficient and professional, but they lacked this particular kind of bond. Marcus joined her, bringing more of the coffee she was beginning to appreciate. "Penny for your thoughts?" The human idiom was unfamiliar, but she understood the intent. "I am observing your people. They face annihilation, yet they continue to find reasons to laugh." "That's humanity for you," Marcus said, settling beside her on what humans called a couch. It was too soft by Kalari standards, but oddly comfortable. "We're too stubborn to know when we're beaten." "It is more than stubbornness," Zara observed. "Your species possesses something we have lost in our millennia of technological advancement. You maintain hope, even in impossible circumstances." As she spoke, she became aware of how close they were sitting. The graviton field that kept her locked in physical form also made her more sensitive to proximity, to the warmth of another being nearby. It was a sensation no Kalari had experienced for centuries, this complete awareness of existing in the same dimensional space as another consciousness. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, his voice quieter now. "What's it like, being able to phase through matter?" Zara considered the question seriously. "Imagine if you could choose when to be affected by gravity, when to breathe air, when to feel the ground beneath your feet. For my people, physical reality is optional. We exist between dimensions, touching your world only when we choose to." "Sounds lonely," Marcus said, and something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. "Lonely?" The concept was difficult to translate into Kalari terms. "We are never truly alone. We can phase to any location, communicate across dimensional barriers, exist in multiple states simultaneously." "But when was the last time someone touched you?" Marcus asked. "Really touched you, not just occupied the same space or communicated across dimensional frequencies. When did you last feel another person's presence?" The question hit her like a physical blow. In Kalari society, physical contact was rare and generally unnecessary. Their phase abilities meant they could interact without truly connecting, exist together without being together. But here, trapped in singular dimensional space, she was beginning to understand what humans called presence. "Never," she admitted quietly. "In 700 years of life, I have never experienced what you call physical contact." Without warning, Marcus reached out and gently touched her hand. The sensation was overwhelming, like being struck by lightning made of warmth and connection. For the first time in her existence, Zara felt truly anchored to reality, genuinely present in a specific moment and place. The touch triggered something unexpected in the graviton field around them. Energy readings throughout the facility spiked as their contact created some kind of resonance effect, amplifying the dimensional stabilization technology beyond its designed parameters. "What's happening?" Zara gasped, but she didn't pull her hand away. The power flowing through their connection felt incredible, like touching the heart of a star. Alarms sounded throughout the bunker as the enhanced graviton field expanded outward, creating a zone of locked dimensional space that extended far beyond the facility's original boundaries. In orbit above, Kalari ships found their phase drives suddenly unreliable as the planet's gravity well took on impossible properties. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, but his grip on her hand tightened rather than loosened. "But whatever it is, it feels right." The energy continued to build, fed by their contact and amplified by technologies neither species fully understood. In that moment, trapped together in a storm of dimensional forces, both of them realized that the war had just changed in ways no one could have predicted. Outside, human and Kalari forces alike stared at readouts that made no sense, watching as the laws of physics rewrote themselves around a single point of contact between two people from different worlds. The real battle was just beginning, but it would no longer be fought with ships and soldiers. It would be fought with hearts and minds, and the raw power that flowed between them when they dared to truly touch. The dimensional storm had lasted 18 hours. When it finally subsided, the galaxy had changed in ways that would take scientists decades to fully understand. The graviton field that had started as a simple defense against phase technology had evolved into something unprecedented, a stable zone of locked dimensional space that extended throughout the entire star system. Zara stood in the command center, watching feeds from across human space as reports flooded in. Kalari fleets throughout the sector were experiencing phase drive failures. Not malfunctions exactly, but an inability to shift between dimensions that left their ships functioning but stranded in normal space. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Kalari Empire was grounded. "The effect is spreading," she reported to Marcus, though her tone held no alarm. The past day had changed her perspective on many things. "My people are calling it the dimensional lock. Entire sectors where phase technology simply will not function." Marcus studied the tactical displays with the focused intensity she had come to appreciate. "Is that a problem for you?" It should have been a catastrophe. The Kalari Empire was built on phase technology. Their ships, their weapons, their entire civilization depended on the ability to exist between dimensions. But as Zara considered the question, she found herself thinking about the past few days, about experiencing reality from a human perspective, and she wasn't sure the answer was as simple as it should be. "My fleet commanders are demanding I find a way to reverse this effect," she admitted. "The High Council considers it an act of war against our fundamental nature." "And what do you consider it?" Before she could answer, her communications officer's voice echoed through the facility. "Commander Velthani, priority transmission from the High Council." The holographic image that materialized in the center of the room was imposing even by Kalari standards. High Counselor Drakthul was ancient beyond human comprehension, his crystalline features bearing the elaborate scarification that marked the highest levels of their society. His presence filled the room with an authority that had shaped galactic politics for centuries. "Commander," his voice resonated with harmonics that human ears could barely process. "You will immediately cease this dimensional contamination and restore normal phase function to our forces." Zara felt Marcus tense beside her, though his expression remained carefully neutral. The past few days had taught her to read human body language in ways that surprised her. She could sense his protective instincts engaging, even though he had no way to threaten a being who could normally exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "High Counselor," she replied with formal respect. The dimensional effects are not under my direct control. They appear to be a side effect of human graviton field technology. Then destroy the source, Drakthul commanded. This primitive species has somehow weaponized dimensional mechanics in ways that threaten our very existence. They must be eliminated before this contamination spreads further. The casual way he discussed genocide, the complete dismissal of human life as irrelevant to Kalari interests, struck Zara like a physical blow. 3 days ago, she would have agreed without question. Now, having spent time among humans, having experienced their resilience and ingenuity firsthand, the Order felt fundamentally wrong. High Counselor, the humans have shown remarkable adaptability. Perhaps there is value in studying their methods rather than simply destroying them. The silence that followed was colder than the void between stars. When Drakthul spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You have been compromised, Commander. Step aside and allow High Commander Zekthar to handle this situation properly. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in tense silence. Zara knew what was coming next. Zekthar was efficient, ruthless, and completely uninterested in the subtleties of human psychology. He would solve the dimensional contamination problem by removing the source entirely. How long do we have? Marcus asked quietly. His fleet will arrive within 2 standard days, Zara replied. He commands the Void Hammers, our most elite battle group. Even without phase technology, they possess enough firepower to sterilize this entire world. She expected despair, panic, or at least concern. Instead, Marcus smiled with the kind of expression she was learning to associate with dangerous human ingenuity. 2 days, he mused. That should be enough time. Enough time for what? To change the rules again. Over the next 48 hours, Zara watched human engineering teams work with an intensity that bordered on miraculous. They modified their graviton field generators, recalibrated dimensional stabilizers, and constructed devices that violated several fundamental principles of physics. But more importantly, they invited her to help. Your people understand dimensional mechanics in ways we're only beginning to grasp, Dr. Sarah Kim, the project's lead scientist, explained as they worked together in the main laboratory. We can create the fields, but you understand how they actually interact with phase technology. It was unprecedented. In 3,000 years of Kalari expansion, no conquered species had ever been treated as an equal partner in technological development. Yet here were humans, facing annihilation, asking their enemy to help them find a better solution. Why? Zara asked as they calibrated the final modifications to the graviton array. Your people could attempt to evacuate, flee to other systems. Why risk everything on an untested theory? Marcus looked up from the control console where he was coordinating the system-wide network they had spent 2 days constructing. Because running away doesn't solve the problem. Your people will just follow us to the next system and the one after that. Eventually, you'll catch up, and we'll be right back where we started. So you choose to make a stand here. We choose to change the nature of the conflict entirely, he corrected. Humans don't just adapt to circumstances, we adapt circumstances to fit us. When Zekthar's fleet emerged from hyperspace, they found a situation unlike anything in Kalari military history. The dimensional lock had evolved during the past 2 days, creating what humans called the convergence field. Instead of simply preventing phase technology, it now allowed voluntary dimensional shifting while making forced phasing impossible. This is High Commander Zekthar. The transmission came from the lead Kalari dreadnought. Surrender immediately or face complete annihilation. Zara stood beside Marcus in the command center, their hands touching, as they had discovered was necessary to maintain the field's stability. The contact still sent energy surging through both of them, but they had learned to channel it, to use the connection to enhance the graviton network beyond anything either species could have achieved alone. "This is Commander Velthani," she replied to her superior officer. "I formally request permission to negotiate a ceasefire." "You are relieved of command for dereliction of duty." Zekthar's response was immediate and final. "Prepare to be destroyed alongside your human allies." The bombardment began moments later. Antimatter warheads and quantum disruptors painting the sky with destructive light. But the weapons struck harmless barriers of crystallized space, their energy absorbed and redirected by the enhanced graviton field. The humans had turned their entire star system into a defensive weapon that fed on dimensional energy. "Impossible," came Zekthar's voice, now carrying the first hint of uncertainty. "No species has ever developed defenses against our weapons." "Actually," Marcus replied, taking over the communication channel with Zara's permission, "we haven't developed defenses against your weapons. We've developed better weapons of our own." The convergence field suddenly inverted, creating pockets of forced dimensional space throughout Zekthar's fleet. Kalari ships found themselves locked in normal reality, their crews trapped in purely physical form for the first time in their species' history. But unlike the fear and disorientation Zara had initially experienced, something else began to happen. Separated from their ability to phase between dimensions, forced to experience reality as humans did, individual Kalari began to understand what their species had lost in their pursuit of technological transcendence. For the first time in millennia, they felt truly present in the world around them. "What are you doing to my crews?" Zekthar demanded, though his voice now carried confusion rather than anger. "Giving them a choice," Zara replied, her hand still clasped firmly in Marcus's. "For the first time in our species' history, we're offering individual Kalari the option to experience existence as other species do." Throughout the fleet, something unprecedented was happening. Kalari crew members, trapped in solid form, began to experience emotions and sensations that had been dulled by centuries of dimensional separation. They felt the warmth of their ship's environment, the presence of their crewmates, the simple reality of existing in a single moment and place. Many panicked, begging for the restoration of their phase abilities. But others, particularly the younger crew members, began to explore this new way of existing with curiosity rather than fear. "This is contamination," Zekthar protested, though his own voice was beginning to change as the field affected his flagship. "You are destroying our fundamental nature." "We're showing you another path," Marcus replied. "Humans have learned that true strength doesn't come from avoiding reality, but from engaging with it completely. Maybe it's time your people learned that lesson too." The standoff continued for 6 hours, neither side firing, both fleets locked in dimensional space while individual Kalari made their choices. Some demanded immediate restoration to phase capability. Others, experiencing physical reality for the first time, began to understand what their species had been missing. When the field finally stabilized at a level that allowed voluntary phasing while maintaining permanent contact with physical reality, 40% of Zekthar's fleet had requested permission to remain in human space to study this new way of existence. This changes everything, Zara realized, watching the readings that showed Kalari and human ships working together to establish permanent colonies in the convergence field. "It changes everything," Marcus agreed, their joined hands still channeling the energy that had made it all possible. "Your people can still phase through walls when they choose to, but now they can also choose not to. They can choose to stay present, to experience true connection. The Kalari Empire's 3,000-year reign as galactic overlords didn't end with conquest or defeat. It ended with choice, as individual Kalari discovered that there was more than one way to exist in the universe, and at the center of it all, a human colonel and a Kalari commander stood hand in hand, living proof that sometimes the greatest power in the galaxy is the simple act of choosing to stay present with someone else. even when you could walk through walls to escape. The war was over. Something much more interesting was just beginning.